Hello, everyone. Welcome to Digital Fridays. This is Meek Mill, a Critical Race Theorist by Kashema Hutchinson, will be the 18th of a series of HASTAC webinars that started in 2019. Kashema Hutchinson is a PhD candidate in the Urban Education Program at the Graduate Center, CUNY. She's the co-director of the Undergraduate Leadership Program and doctoral fellow at the Futures Initiative. Kashema creates and uses infographics to facilitate discussions on the role of women in history, philosophy, behavioral economics, and class and crime. Her research interests include the socialization of Black girls and women, zero tolerance policies, mattering and marginalization, mindfulness, and hip hop pedagogy. This webinar includes language and concepts that may not be suitable for all listeners. Discretion is advised.
When we're looking at critical race critical race theory in education, we see that there's a lot at play here. So when we talk about critical race theory, you have to always, look at the history. What is it? How did it get here? What are we doing? And as we can see, there's a genealogy to it. It came really after the civil rights movement and civil rights acts, where critical legal studies were addressing what was happening in socio-political landscape. And what they found was the critical legal studies kind of avoided the subject of race, which kind of contradicted everything, right? And so theorists such as Bell, Trenchard, Delgado, Stefanik, and others decided to challenge this, right? And when I talk about the socio-political landscape context, I'm speaking about Brown court decisions such as Brown versus the Board of Education, in which people thought that things would be better in the education system, right? Separate but equal is not equal. What they really missed out is that in the decision that was made, there was actually one sentence that pretty much the purpose of it was because they were America was fighting against communism. It was a Cold War. And in order to get people on their side, they had to integrate the schools, right? And so that is in the original critical race theory, that's called interest convergence, where white supremacy is actually doing things that you think is for the better good of the country, but it's really for their interest, because Russia has Cuba, things are getting hot in these streets, and they're pretty much like, America's like, nah, we can't say we're free, we can't say we're democracy, we can't say equality, and our schools are segregated. But way before the Civil Rights Act, there were theorists who did not use the term critical race theory, but nevertheless used it in their work, used the same ideas in their work, and those two are W.E. Du Bois and Carter G. Woodson. So if anyone's ever heard of The Miseducation of the Negro, Carter G. Woodson's instrumental work and groundbreaking work, and how that's impacted the Black minds of Americans today. And then, of course, W.E. Du Bois, my sociological twin, we can talk about that later, on why he's my twin. So I'm looking at W.E.B. Du Bois because he did before that, W.E.B. Du Bois was the first Black person to graduate from Harvard University, right? And when they asked him, how do you feel? He was just like, it's fine, the pleasure is all, it's Harvard that should have the gratitude, really, right? So, but he couldn't get work. So what he did, he was hired by the University of Pennsylvania to do this study on, why are Blacks like that, right? Just to fast forward the terminology, the lingo, right? Why are Blacks the way they are? How are their social, what is the root of their social interactions? So he does the study like over a span of 3 years, an intensive study. The study was so intensive that he missed the birth of his first child, right? And so what he does, he collects stories and stats to create this huge profile of the 7th Ward in Philadelphia. And also the social structures and how the people in Philadelphia interacted with it, right? And so many people know Du Bois as saying the talented tenth, and how the opposite of that is the submerged tenth. And the findings of that study actually implicated that the reason why Black people operate the way they do is because of racism, prejudice, jealousy, right? And so because they have these barriers in healthcare, education, and the job market, it's hard for them to lift themselves up. So in the souls of Black folks, remember, he's talking about 10th, and the talented 10th is very, is regarded as something that is not, it doesn't exist, right? The 10% of the Black population cannot save the rest of the bottom. It's very elitist. It's very, what it does is it's kind of like separates and kind of like stratifies the Black community as if we're different, when all these other plays, all these other structures still have impact on our lives. So by the time he writes The Souls of Black Folk, his son dies, his firstborn dies. And the reason why the child dies is because they were in Atlanta, the child dies, and the child was sick, and when they tried to go to the doctor, all the white doctors turned him away, despite that he was the first to graduate from Harvard, despite the fact that he was this distinguished Black man. He still was susceptible to this racism, jealousy that he had written about years prior. So he was hell-bent on this whole respectability politics, and it kind of shined a light on what was happening regardless of who you were, right? And so in The Souls of Black Folks, when you read it, there's, it's the first literary text that mixes music and songs and spirituals inside of the text. This is in the South. He's in the South now, right? Up in Harlem, at the same time period, is there's a group, right? A dope group who like shunned Du Bois's ideology of what the talented 10th meant and the respectability politics and how we should operate in this country, because they knew better. So they said, you know what, we're gonna do our work for the common folk, and that's the way it's gonna be. So you got Zora Neale Hurston, Langston Hughes, Johnson, Gwendolyn Bennett, all of these literary people, and in the North, saying we're gonna cater our work and be the voice of the common people, right? And a lot of people connect this lineage of resistance to like power and resistance to respectability politics to that of hip hop. But I'm gonna get into that really quickly. So they're on 136th Street, chilling out, doing what they're doing, singing their songs, writing their music, writing their plays, writing their books, creating art for the public. One of them wrote, Negroes sweet and docile, meek, humble, and kind, beware the day that they change their mind. I think this talks to what the political, socio-political climate today, but we're gonna move forward. So who is Meek Mill, right? Elijah Anderson in 2004 wrote a study and a book called Cosmopolitan Canopy. And in it, he writes, as young Black men, I'm gonna include women, right? Talk about themselves. It seems as though each man has a story of police harassment or public discrimination. Whether true in an objective sense, it is too often believed true by the Black male, leading him to develop his own sense of group position vis-a-vis the wider society, especially whites. In this respect, Black men engage in folk ethnography, talking among themselves, comparing notes, and developing strategies for avoiding such arbitrary treatment and salvaging their self-respect. That's a lot. And I also cut out some of these, as you can see with the ellipses. So let me highlight this real quick. So they talk among themselves. What's a synonym for talking among yourself? I would say rapping, right? It's also, and everyone has a story. It's often believed to be as truth. So if it's often believed to be believed as true, that means you have a knowledge system, right? A truth system, a belief system that you're working with. Group position vis-a-vis the wider society, especially with whites. So if you know your group position, there's gonna be like a hierarchy, right? In position wise. And then they engage in fourth ethnography. So as a academic, we know that there's a format and a structure to our papers. There's a, how do you say, for, I think it's for every field really, for these papers, that you have to write in order to be published, to be recognized, and all that good stuff. So I decided to use this template, and this is what I create, and this is what came up. So when we look at it, right, the abstracts, the introduction comes in as ad-libs, ingredients. The lit review is them getting from various sources what happened, when, where, right? And how that informs what they're going to do methodology-wise. And so folk ethnography, which is usually used in social studies as a signifier for non-white scholars when they use narrative to explain anything, such as, let's say, suicide, right? Sorry, I should have had a trigger warning for that. I apologize, right? So say you're doing a study and you say, Black males, this is the stats versus white males, right? And then you write the story of a narrative of a survivor, or you get research information of like a trail of mental health conditions. And so you tell this narrative of this story, of this phenomenon. It's disregarded because it's not quantitative and it's considered not research, but a story, right? And people call it me-search instead of research, but it's actually research, but this is academia. So the results are developing strategies for avoiding such arbitrary treatment and salvaging their self-respect. So it's pretty much how you move in. Long story short, right? How do you move? How do you telling your friends to move? How are you telling your cousins to move? Who's telling you how to move, right? And so what I did was give you some examples, like older to younger generation, right? Have that conversation. What do you do when the police stop you, right? What do you, what's the conversation that you have with your peers about going down certain streets or certain alleys or whatever? So that's double conscious. So that's Anderson. And then I'm taken from Du Bois, who comes up with double consciousness in The Souls of Black Folk, and I'm extended it to Boykin's Triple Quandary. And so when you look at the gentleman on your left-hand side, the silhouette, Boykin argues that Black people come with different lenses, right? And different ways of different modes of operation, right? So you have the verb, you have the spirituality, you have the communalism, you have the oral tradition, being expressive, and individualism. And so when you look at that, all of these things that play, like if you've ever heard the expressiveness and the kids talking too much, right? And they're quote unquote wilding out or being bad or misbehaving. This is like passed down customs and actions, right? And so I say individualism because how can you have individualism and communalism? I just asked you earlier, where were you from, right? Where do you represent? So even though you are from, say, Far Rockaway, you also represent where you're from, but you also have your own identity within your collective, right? It's kind of like the Ubuntu. I am because we are because I am. So when we got back to Meek Mill now, I noticed something visually when I was looking at his album work. In 2012, he drops his Dream Chaser 2 mixtape, in which you see the gold chains, the iced out chains, all this materialism, right? The bike, the money in the background, but he's dreaming of this is what he's dreaming of. By the time you get to October, he has, I want to say, it's a rollie connected to a handcuff, right? And also, he was also arrested in 2012. And they're inseparable, right? Dreams and nightmares. So in chasing your dreams, just know that the nightmares is right behind it, right? It's not too far away. And just because you have a dream and just because you get your dream doesn't mean that you're in the clear. And so when we look at what those dreams are, really, as far as descriptive wise, you see it's the American dream, which is individualism, materialism, and meritocracy. And so it's kind of, as a dream chaser, he also understands that the nightmare would be mass incarceration, inadequate education, poor healthcare, and lack of employment. And of course, extrajudicial killings, as we've seen recently. And so we're gonna go through the 5 tenets of critical race theory in education through the lens of Meek Mill. So back to number 1. The intercentricity of race and racism with other forms of subordination. As you can see from these lyrics that Meek Mill wrote in 2012, he is also, he's looking at status and he's looking at race, right? So being Black, right? And being broke. That's 2012. Keep that in mind. The challenges to dominant ideology, Meek says, in a world where Black is wrong and white is right, it's like a combat. We go to war for our freedom. They say we equal. So even though he doesn't even know what about the Brown versus Ed decision line that I told you about, he still understands what's going on. Commitment to social justice. So his commitment to social justice has been my entry to my entry to Meek Mill scholarship starts at Dream Chasers, right? So before that, he had Flamers and he was with the Bloodhounds. I start from Dream Chasers because that's kind of like my entry, and so it's not that I'm disregarding it, but it's also something that it is what it is. So I'm taking 2011 to 2018, right? So for 7 years, actually, we're gonna count till today, right? So 9 years, he's been doing this, right? He's been telling these stories in his lyrics, right? From the Dream Chaser series to the championships. Since his release from jail, his recent release, he helped to start a nonprofit organization, Reform Alliance, and in Reform Alliance, they have it's a collective with a commitment to change laws, policies, and practices that perpetuate the horrific injustice we're seeing in America, right? So that's like an amazing feat, but they're dedicated to it. We've seen them push and create awareness about probation laws. We've seen them during COVID send masks out to different jails, including Rikers Island that I used to work at. And of course, the centrality of experiential knowledge, AKA what they would call the folk ethnography. And so Meek's life is growing up in North Philadelphia, has a firsthand knowledge of the criminal justice system, including 3 arrests and 12 years on probation, which has informed him and inspired his music, AKA his theoretical perspective. Right? And so transdisciplinary, using the transdisciplinary perspective, we see that he mentioned slavery, the legal system, and social interactions, which are in his lyrics. So now I want you to vote, right? From everything I just told you. So what I want to do is go back to Du Bois's seminal work, the Philadelphia Negro, and just tease through it and see how it connects with critical race theory and Meek Mill. So in the book, he mentions colorism and how the lighter you are, the more successful you are, and the more successful you are, and the darker you are, the least successful you are, right? And so he also noted that in what was called the talented 10th group, right, there were more lighter and fair skin, and by the time you get to the submerged 10th, you're more, there are more dark-skinned people in that group. And so the vicious and criminal classes, as he called them, right? And so in thinking about Du Bois, when I was reading parts of the Philadelphia Negro, the submerged 10th kind of reminded me of how there are a lot of rhymes that Meek Mill say that kind of align with it. And so I want to tease through the submerged 10th idea, right? And so when I went back to other critical race theorists, even some who may not acknowledge themselves as critical race theorists, I realized that Matsuda uses the term looking to the bottom. Derrick Bell faces at the bottom of the well. Sylvia Winter, she discusses social hierarchy. Latin Billings and Tate, they also just adding on and developing the theory, talk about the bottom. And of course, critical race scholars Tara J. Yasso does the same. So the terminology is there, right, from the bottom. So what I want you to do right now is in the chat, you are a rapper. Congratulations. I just signed you to my deal, my record company. You got $5 million. And all I need you to do is come up with some synonyms for the bottom, because I'm going to send you into the boot to make your first hit record. Go. And my engineer / producer, Adashima Oyo, she's going to just read off some of the, she's just going to read off some of the synonyms while I,
So we have forgotten, we have poverty, we have in depth, we have gutter, the trap, the river, the dirt, basement, the mud. That's just a few of them. The sunken place, trenches, the base, foundation, the ground, the corner.
Okay.
Stepping stones. I'm gonna leave it at that.
Okay, thank you to my engineer. She gets paid by the hour, so let's go. So of course, Meek Mill has a had a habit of deleting his Instagram, so I had to like go and like screenshot it from. So of course, this was like right after the passing of Nipsey Hussle, as you can see as his icon avatar, and at the bottom in his bio, he puts in the quotes from the bottom. So what I did was I looked at some of the ways that he mentions this social hierarchy, right? That we see in America, right? The faces that Mari Matsuda wants to show, the faces from the bottom, that if you want to change theory, if you want to highlight and fix problems, you have to go to the source, and the source is technically in the social hierarchy at the bottom. So what I did was I went from the Dream Chasers series to championships, went through the discography and picked from the bottom and listened for songs and the synonyms from the bottom. So some of you got it. So we're just gonna look at it right now. So this is actually Tory Lanez. And this is the start of Lord Knows on his Dreams Are Worth More Than Money.
All I wanted was a new Mercedes. Bending on the corner, whipping up the lot, I got it. Women love me, but the niggas hate it. But how can I know when I came from the bottom? Lord knows.
So there is explicit lyrics. I forgot to tell you, if you have children around, might want to put in some headphones. I apologize for that. But as Tory Lanez begins the song, he talks about wanting the car, right? The American dream, the car, luxury car, the Mercedes. Bando on the corner. A bando is pretty much a trap house. A trap house is where drugs are sold and made, created, processed, produced, all that good stuff. Well, not good stuff, but how it's done. So that's a trap house, or where it's sold, depending on the setup of the trap house. I also realized that Meek Mill has a very religious and spiritual background. He's not really the quote unquote church boy that we know, but we do know that like his grandmother used to take him to church. And so he has a lot of religious influence. And as the slide where I showed you about the triple quandary, where spirituality was something that was a part of Black life, we hear the valley in the Bible. The valley is a low place, right? Of despair, of hopelessness, you know, of fear. And so Meek Mill does it, uses it in 4 different projects.
Any weapon formed against us shall not prosper. Young niggas started with oozing noodles, now we eating lobster. As I walk through the valley with my ladder and flex, I'm the realest nigga in it, I just happen to rap. When they all thought we was finished, they was laughing at that. So I went and bought me a dawn and flipped their head to the back.
So here we talk, he says he walks through the valley, but he doesn't walk by himself or without fear. He's prepared with a gun, pretty much, a firearm, to survive the valley. But right before that, he says, any weapon against me shall not prosper. So he already has a spiritual prayer that he does, and then he goes in still to protect himself. So in Dream Chasers, he talks about, in Championships, he talks about the basement and the cellar, which is pretty interesting to me because in 2011, Dream Chaser, he talks about, you know, writing his rhymes in the basement and to braille to the ground up. By the time he gets to Dream Chasers, he says, I'm in the penthouse, but I came from the cellar, right? So he literally recorded songs in a basement, and I think it's his cousin's house in a basement, right? But when we talk about basement, like which room would you want in the house? One without the window or with the window, right? It's usually something on the first floor or up. And so the basement is symbolizes how, basement / cellar symbolizes how the symbolizes the bottom. So here we go, because I know y'all don't want to hear me talk.
I'ma chase my dream, coming to America like Prince Hakeem. I ain't never give a fuck, but then I seen high definition to give was forever given, but nothing was never given. I built it from ground up. I started out with my basement and building my house up. I'm rich off the opportunity, money gon' pile up.
So you hear all the materialism, you hear his ambitions and just trying to make it. So the trenches is interesting because it's also controversial as a synonym, because people are just like, oh, you can't say trenches because you never know what it's been like to be in a war, and it's totally different from fighting. And there are actually studies that say that like living in impoverished neighborhoods creates PTSD that is similar to war veterans. So I'm holding it. That's where it is. And so you see him mention trenches in these 3 bodies of work. And also the trench that I have is double-sided. It's called 2 slopes, because you got to watch your front and you got to watch your back.
Amen. Lord forgive me for all my sins. Took so many risks just to get a Benz. Pray for my niggas, all my friends. In the trenches, one with killers, we been getting it in.
And so from the bottom, it's really a place, but I realized while rereading the Philadelphia Negro, and also just what's happening and just my knowledge of hip hop and rap, that there's a lot of talks of under, right? And so the musical clip that I'm gonna play for you is actually a line from actually Grandmaster Flash and the Furious 5, The Message, this first socially conscious rap song that was created in 1982. And the reason why I put this here is because of necrophilia and how young Black men and women who are quote unquote from the bottom, their life expectancy or their thoughts of life expectancy isn't as, their view of it, right? Their view of it isn't like someone from a middle class neighborhood, right? And so when we look at it this way, I couldn't not see it this way when Du Bois wrote this. He wrote about the #1 death in the 7th Ward was actually consumption. What is consumption? In 2020, the terminology is actually tuberculosis. What is tuberculosis? A respiratory condition that attacks the lungs, fever, coughing, yeah, sort of like COVID. And what's happening with COVID? Predominantly Black people are dying. Black and brown people are dying. It's not really up for discussion. It is what it is. And so we see this happening, and like the mortality rate and the perspective of it, and it affects your psyche, you know, it affects what you say, what you do, how you move. So I could not have it play.
How I keep from going under. It's like a jungle outside. Sometimes I wonder how I keep from going under.
And of course, if it's going to be submerged, right, got to have some water in it. And I realized that in a lot of Meek Mill's discography, he talks about fish, right? Big fish, little fish, and the nature of it, right? There's 2 types of fish in his lyrics. One is sexual, and what is like hierarchy, social hierarchy, right? Yeah, hold on.
Realest nigga ain't in no capacity. And they got the nerve to tell me that I'm mad. But what the fuck, I'm young Black, I made it in the mad. Cause so I'm a ball harder than the motherfucking Carters. Beyonce showing arm bluer than a daughter. Maneuver through the water like a shark that's on a dolphin. Nigga darker in the coffin, devil on his.
So he's maneuvering through the
realest nigga ain't in no capacity.
Sorry. So he's maneuvering through the water like a shark on a dolphin. So anyone who's knows anything about marine biology, the shark usually loses. However, in this instance, he's going for his, and the dolphin will not win this one. And if you think he's agitated or why is he rapping like this, this song is Little Snoop, and actually it's Little Nigga Snoop. And what he's doing, when his proteges was killed. And so he has to figure out whether or not he should tell young Black men to walk away or to like fight, right? Because there's crime, because of the gun violence that happens in communities of people from the bottom. And so when I did it, this is what it looks like. And when we talk about commitment to the cause, this is what it looks like. So you can see that there is a commitment to social justice from 2011 straight back to his last record. And actually in championships, like you see the most, right? Because that's after his last release from prison. So one more time. This time you don't have to, just put it in the chat, yes or no. Do you think Meek Mill is a critical race theorist? And so when we're looking, the purpose of this, right, and why I do what I do is because I'm taking things, quote unquote, from the bottom and I'm bringing it into the ivory tower and I'm making it and I'm centralizing it. Because there's no way that I can be an urban education scholar and not see that how hip hop has influenced and affects young adults. Now, I'm not saying that every child who is Black or brown listens to raps, but I'm saying that their narratives are inside of these lyrics, are inside of these bars, right? So that is it. Any questions? Let me know. And thank you.
Thank you.
Bridget asked. So the thing is that, okay, so here's a funny, so we were supposed to have a conference and so I can't really give everything away, Bridget, but I wanted to actually, the thing is this, I learned that everything that was being said in the ivory tower is being said in the streets, right? And because we don't have access and because we're not valued, our voice is not valued, it's not recognized. This is where I'm just like bucking the system. And the people who know me know that I'm forever fighting, right? And so I'm just like, forever, I can, Jihan, I'm forever in these ivory towers moving like Meek, right? Because the voices of these young children matter, right? I'm forever fighting that fight where the ivory tower will look differently, or the work outside of it will be something that allows for young children to see themselves. So that's where the bringing the ivory tower is. I'm also like a kind of girl with destroy and rebuild kind of girl. So as far as the ivory tower is concerned, I mean, I'm not like hell bent on it, but yeah. Thank you, Daylight Media. So about the metaphors in it, what would you like? What would you like, Jihan? Bennett, where do you think Meek goes? He released had a kid, and what does a conversation mean once you've achieved a new sense of freedom on a personal level? You know, Meek is still growing, right? Because Meek in the beginning of 2019, he was resistant to be called an advocate. He was resistant to being, you know, this person that, a leadership thing, right? And even today, he went off, shout out to Summer, who was just like, yo, Meek is going off on Twitter. And when I look, one of the tweets that I actually screenshot, he says, I'm not Meek Mandela or Meek Luther King. Funny. Meek, ellipses, Meek from the trenches, just holding down his people like he said he would when he got rich. So what happens is there's a resistance to this figure, this leadership figure, but it doesn't matter whether you put the title on yourself or not, you're still doing the work. You know what I mean? It's like saying that Julia Ann Cooper doesn't know intersectionality when she's the first Black published woman to actually write about intersectionality, and how that changed, how that gave sight to say this was been happening since day one, you know? So that's it. There are a lot of comments that are coming in. I can't read that fast. I'm so sorry.
Kashema, there's a question about why did you pick Meek Mill to focus on, considering some of the other rappers? Would you care to address that?
Sure. So my first PhD paper, I actually took a nomenclature class, and I was writing it on Nadia Lopez in Brownsville, Brooklyn. And 2015, again, you know, we're fighting for Eric Gardner, all these, Trayvon Martin. We're still, I mean, yeah, we're still heartbroken on all of this. And I realized in Eric Gardner, he says he can't breathe, right? And as an advertising major, I remember there's something called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And the first hierarchy is the physiological, right? Which is breathing, air, food, all that stuff. And I looked at it and I said, Eric Gardner took his last breaths to save his first level of need. And so as I said that, songs pop into my head as I read, and all I've said was there's levels to this. And that's Levels is a song on Self-Made Volume 2 of MMG, which is his album. And so I started to replay that song, there's levels to this shit, there's levels to this shit. And I was just like, okay. And then I went, of course, automatic to Dreams and Nightmares, and it kind of like just opened everything up. And so I've been writing for Meek heavily since then. And yes, he is human. And yes, I can critique everything that he does. I'm still one of those people who says someone needs to take his phone away from him every once in a while. Yes, I am still one of those people, but I also see the bigger picture. I also see the impact. I know that when he was released, there were young adults in junior high school who were rooting for him, right? And it's just like, they are nowhere invested in this man. He doesn't know these children. Nevertheless, they want him to win. Why? Because they're like him. They see themselves in him. Their friends, their families, right, kind of look like him. Stephen, what will it take for more pedagogy of this nature to spread in mass across higher education? Stephen, we're on HASTAC because HASTAC is a place that's decolonizing, right? I know a lot of you just heard about HASTAC probably in the last week or so because I'm promoting this, but HASTAC is a place for decolonizing. So you have to like know and search out places of decolonizing. There will be certain places, like the first time I presented was at Harvard, right? On Meek Mill. However, it's just little nooks, but you want some place where it's heavily invested in it and continually invested in it. And so HASTAC is a place like that, and then bring it up, right? Build it from the ground up. This is what we're doing. This is what I'm doing, right? This is my life's work. Joe, bottom will no longer be negative once you realize that the bottom is the foundation, right? Once you know and understand that the bottom is the foundation and you put in the groundwork and it's quote unquote, let's give you another synonym for bottom, be the core of it, right? Then you will, then that will change. But for now, you know what it is. Yeah, the public, I agree, Jahan, the public university should not be the ivory tower. An ivory tower, it should be an education by all people, but we know that that's just, us dreaming. And as a dream chaser, we will continue to not only dream, but chase that dream of creating change. Yeah, so I have 5 minutes left. Let me see. Yes, roots, absolutely, Bridget, yes. I actually have that as a, in a different presentation. I have it, but it's not explicitly said, you just see it. The one I did at Princeton, similar to both, what's on the horizon other than artists for research and expression. I mean, this is my, thank you, Tiffany and Crystal. This is where I'm like staking my claim. This is what I'm doing. Of course, if you've seen my other infographics, on Kashema.com, you will see I've looked at it in different ways. Oh shoot, sorry. I've looked at hip hop in different ways, but really I'm channeling the fifth element of hip hop, which is the knowledge of self, right? Because if you don't know that you can be great, you don't know that you are of greatness, you won't exactly like go for it, right? Because you're told that you're from the bottom, right? You're told that you're from the trenches, right? So what does the sky look like, right? Shout out to Biggie, sky's the limit. That's where I'm going for. My final thoughts are just to see hip hop, there's more to hip hop. Just to know that there's more to hip hop, and there are different ways to look at it. There's a lot of conversations about hip hop education, and last year Valentine's Day, 3 of my scholars, Stephen, Kia, and Yadira, came in and just totally ripped it, right? And they're undergraduate students, and I gave them prompts, and I said, here's what you're gonna do, and that was using Mark Monthill's book, Beats, Rhymes, and Classroom Life, and how hip hop influences pedagogy, right? And we presented it at the Graduate Center, and then we went to Vancouver and presented it at the HASTAC conference, and they like blew it away. Mind you, undergraduate students doing PhD work. This is what I do it. This is why I do it. You know, because if it's not me, we're all listening to it. We're all listening to hip hop, even if it's a sample, right? My favorite Meek song is Ready or Not on Dream Chasers 2, because you're not ready for me, right? And whether or not you're ready doesn't matter. I'm still gonna do what I need to get done. And thank you to everyone for coming. It's been amazing. It's a hustle, Marcus. It's a hustle, right? Because you have to, there's some bending. There's some bending to this, to getting into the academy. And I can have a whole different session on that, but we're running out of time. Thank you so much to everyone who came in and did their job and participated. I appreciate it. Much love. Thanks.
So I'd like to thank everyone for joining this Digital Fridays. It was a great presentation by Kashema. This Digital Fridays will be recorded. It has been recorded, I should say, rather. And hopefully we will get a recap blog post from Kashema that will be posted on our HASTAC website. So thank you all for joining, and be safe.